I am Amy Haun. I am a Knox County Master Gardener. I've been a Master Gardener for 10 years now. And I do have a confession. I'm addicted to gardening. And there's always something new to learn, always something to hear about. And every time I hear about something new, I want to try it. And I'm like, no, sit on your hands. You can't try everything. So my husband sometimes gets frustrated. And I've been having some health issues the past couple of years, and my garden is out of control. Okay, so let's talk IPM. That is not the topic of this talk, though I could talk for hours about IPM, or integrated pest management. You will see the first, on your handout, that first reference after the information about Knox County Master Gardeners is a link to the North Carolina Extension Gardener Handbook and their chapter about IPM. If you want information about that, feel free to go and read that. It is a good, really good chapter. But what we're going to talk about today is actually bugs without borders. Now, bugs is a large category to me. I am not talking about true bugs or Hemiptera species. We're going to go way beyond that. I do include in bugs things that aren't insects. But have you noticed they don't respect borders? You put up a fence, they go through it, they go over it, they go under it and around it. And so what does a gardener do? So insects and other bugs damage crops. This is why we're interested in knowing about it. They damage crops. They damage the ornamental value of your plants. And so let's go into a little bit of history before we talk about the future. So we do live in one world that's all connected. And the connections have gotten increasingly fast. Many of the plants in our gardens have come from other countries. Initially, they came by sailboat and wagon. And when they came by sailboat and wagon, very often the bugs that tried to tag along with them didn't make it with them. But as things have gotten faster and faster, the bugs are more likely to make it here with the plants. Also, more plants and plant materials are being transported. So this is a chart of the history. The bar graph is the nursery product import value starting in 1854. You can see there's almost nothing. And as time goes on, there's more and more. The different colors are from the different regions of the world where plants have been imported from. But you'll also see there's numbers here. That's the number of actually just Hemiptera species that have come into our region, sorry about that, North America, from the different regions. So, you know, the majority of our plants, you can see are in purple. That's, the battery cover fell off. That's odd. Okay. The majority of the plants are actually from Europe, Asia, and a little bit into Africa, so that bioregion, and the majority of insects that have come over are from that region. But there is a lag. We also have these folks. Any idea who they are? They're plant inspectors at the borders that work diligently to try to prevent pest insects from coming into the US. But they're not perfect. And some of these insects don't come in through plant import ways. You know, I think they think, like the jumping worm might have come in the ballast on a ship. That it might not have come in through a plant. So there are other materials that are brought into the country. We're pretty sure, do you know the carpenter beetles, the big ones? Carpenter bees. They're not native to the US, but we're pretty sure they came in the wood of sailing ships. So there's different ways they came in. Those came in real early. Okay, so let's look at Tennessee. So you have things coming into the US. We also have things coming into Tennessee, and there is a lag. So the imported cabbage worm, if you read stuff that the founding fathers wrote or about Williamsburg, they can grow all sorts of cabbage family crops. No problem. Well, the cabbage worm came into the US in 1860. So that's well beyond that era. It took 40 years to be in Tennessee. So the imported cabbage worm has been in Tennessee since 1900. How many of you have seen them this year? Yep. And how many of you have cabbage crops in the ground? Are they covered? Yes, they are. So if you have cabbage crops in the ground now, cover them with insect netting or very light row cover, and that'll help. Okay, so Japanese beetles came into the US in 1916 and came into Tennessee 20 years later in 1936. Woolly adulgent, that's a major issue with the hemlocks in the Smoky Mountains. Came into the US in 1951 and came into Tennessee in 2002. So there is a program in the Smokies that they are treating some of the hemlocks to keep them alive. There's also programs importing pests, importing predators of those woolly adulgents. So that's one of the things they do. Okay, brown marmorated stink bug. 1998, it came into the US, took 10 years to get to Tennessee. And I remember the first year it was in my garden and it was horrible. And yet, as the years go by, I think the birds have learned their food. And they're not as big an issue as they were initially. I still do see them, but it's not like those first couple of years. Okay, another big one is the emerald ash borer, 2002 in the US, made it to Tennessee by 2008. So you can see some insects travel more quickly. Some of them actually, where they came into the US was closer to Tennessee. I'm not exactly sure. But do you remember a while ago you would see these purple rectangular boxes hung up in trees? That's monitoring for the emerald ash borer. Okay, recent one, to Tennessee at least, or Knoxville. 2004, we have the Great Myrtle bark scale. I know some of you have had issues with those. And 2013, it came into Tennessee. Was seen in Knox County about, I think, 4 years ago. And so a lot of the neighborhoods that have a lot of great myrtles planted have really seen them affected by them. Now this is an interesting one. This is what's called the gypsy moth, has been changed to the spongy moth. Came into the US in 1869, and it took until 1970 to make it to Tennessee. So that is a really slow moving one, and because of that, we don't have any resident populations in Tennessee because they put up these little green traps, or sometimes they're orange, and they're monitoring for that spongy moth. And if they find it, they will do a treatment program in that area. And they've been able to keep it from becoming resident, but it must be a very slow mover. You know, if it took 100 years to get to Tennessee, not like the 10 years for some of those. Now, we have another one. This one's a fast mover. Came into the US in 2014. It's the spotted lanternfly. Have you all heard of that? Okay. Yeah, most everyone's heard of it. It has been spotted in Tennessee last year in Williamson and Davison counties have confirmed sightings of them. And they've been primarily in Pennsylvania and that area of New England. But do you know how we're connected? There's this big road that goes straight from there to here, and they've been known to lay their egg cases in wheel wells. Yes. And they have actually been spotted as far as Kansas. One was found, they found out it was in Kansas because there was a spotted lanternfly in a kid's bug collection. Yes. Yeah, I don't know if there's a resident population there, but they know it's been spotted there. Yeah. This fella, it's actually a kind of a plant hopper, even though it almost looks like a butterfly. Yeah. But they enjoy sucking the sap out of hundreds of different types of plants, including grapes and many of our ornamental plants. I don't have the list in my head. Okay, so, there you can see, just a little bit of the history of plant pests that have come into the U.S. So what's a gardener to do? When you see bug damage, or you actually see a bug in your garden, don't panic. Also, don't convict the first bug you see. As you can see, this plant has some holes in it, but does anyone know what that bug is?
Ladybug larva.
It is a ladybug larva, that is correct. So, that ladybug larva did not cause the hole. It might very well be there trying to prey on some of the pests that would be likely to cause holes, though they're more aphid eaters, which would cause the discoloration. Okay, so as you look at insects, 97% of insects are harmless or neutral to our plants. Only about 3% are harmful to plants. So that just puts it in perspective a little bit. And you want to ID what you see before you take action. This is the old school method of IDing. You look at the number of legs, wings, eye shape, all that stuff. Sometimes you can find things in books. But today, most people use this device. And so there are a multitude of apps you can use. And many of them are good, and some of them are not so good, but you always still have to engage your brain when you use them. So, you look up what the pest is, you see what it says, and then I advise you can go to your browser on your phone, or you can go to your computer and do an additional search. Now, if you don't know what it is, you can use, just a search to find it using the colors, the type of, body shape it's got, whether it's a bug, worm, beetle, its size. You can use that, and oftentimes you can find what it is that way. But if you already have a name, put that name in that you've gotten, and put the word extension, and sort of confirm that you've got the right thing. And if you've gotten the right thing, you should have some references that give you how to control that. There's a lot of, so this is, Japanese beetle, and I looked up UT extension, and there's a couple different publications about what to do, and they do go into the details. And so, this shows, oh, this is the pest, this is what its damage looks like, that's what its larva looks like. You'll very rarely see those. And there are a lot of grubs in lawns and in the soil, and most of them are beneficial. And grub identification, the larva of a Japanese beetle is a grub, is a beetle grub. But there's a lot of beneficial beetles that also have grubs. And grub identification is a whole art in itself. So I usually don't say try to figure out if it's a Japanese beetle grub. But, so this is the thing. There are pesticides you can use if you decide to go that route. They do give other information about different kinds of controls. If you decide to use a pesticide, follow the label. And whatever you do, do it in a targeted way. You know, if you just have the Japanese beetles on one plant, target that plant for treatment if that's the route you decide to go. Okay. Also, for some of these that I mentioned, pretty much all the ones I mentioned, except for probably, I don't think they're tracking imported cabbage worms. You know, honestly, they've been here too long. You can go to Protect Tennessee Forests and report them. And they do definitely ask you to report crepe myrtle bark scale, especially spotted lanternfly. And the other pests, they do have a list on their website, crepe myrtle bark scale, emerald ash borer, but you might see their damage, but you probably won't see them. They're tiny, so the ash borers. But you might see their damage, and one of the things about it is, so they'll do these tunnels under the bark, and when they come out, the hole that they leave when they come out looks like a capital D. So that's one of the identifying marks of emerald ash borer. But it's little. It's like, I think it's between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch, somewhere in that range. Okay, spotted lanternfly. These are the different life stages of them. So you can see that it looks very different as it goes through its life stages. So report those if you see them. Okay, but now, as gardeners, how do we respond to this international world with pests, new pest insects coming in, when many ornamental landscapes have a lot of imported plants? So, how many of you have seen this situation? You know, just a whole line of one species, or maybe, totally dependent on maybe 3 species. Or that one. Knockout roses and daylilies. You don't see that as much right now. And that is because of a disease that came in, rose rosette disease, which the knockout roses are very susceptible to. So many of the commercial landscapes don't have the roses anymore. But you know, these are landscapes that are dependent on a very few species. And so if a pest comes in or a disease comes in that impacts that species, it will essentially blast apart your garden plans. But there are other approaches. There are other roads we can travel. So this is an example of a really diverse landscape with lots of different plants. And what would happen to this landscape if a pest or disease came in that really took out one species? Would you even notice it? No. So diversity, this is called a this is called a mixed planting. So there's different names that people use, and you can use those as you search for it. And there's stuff in your references about it. So this is a mixed planting where they have a bunch of different species represented, or a layered planting where it's more like a woodland, you know, where you have a lot of different species. And this one I think is depending largely on native species. So as you're looking for resources to figure out how to implement a more diverse landscape, in this area, one of the best places to go is Tennessee Smart Yards. They have a really good set of videos that help you figure out, you know, what's the right plant for the right place, about soil and watering, and all that stuff. So they have a lot of good videos to watch. They also have resources. They have a really good plant list, really good plant database. So they are really helpful in getting you to that more diverse landscape. So this is some of the things that have happened in my landscape, and whoa, this is ending up shorter than I thought it would. Okay, so I have a really diverse landscape. Some of it's intentional, some of it's things that came in on their own, some of which I wanted and some of which I didn't. But you know, you have the pollinators, the bees, praying mantis, monarch butterfly flies, though I haven't seen them in the past couple of years, which makes me very sad. And then, do you see the damage on these leaves? That is damage that makes me excited. That's leaf cutter bees. They cut circular sections out of leaves to put between, okay, they nest in tubes in plant stems. And between the different larvae, the different eggs that they lay, they'll put a layer of cut leaves or sometimes cut flowers, little circles. And they'll cut those out and they'll put those between the different eggs that they lay. And so it's exciting to see their damage. And then we have, you know, some other folks. We've got, yeah, one of the ladies was talking to me about the caterpillars and the recruited wasps that parasitize the tomato hornworms. You also have assassin beetles up on this purple coneflower. What is it? Goldenrod soldier beetle. And then this is one of my friends right here. That's a syrphid flying larva who's getting ready to eat all those aphids and is eating a circle around itself. Yeah. And then this is a really cool one I saw one year. That is a wasp, and he's actually eating one of those imported cabbage worm caterpillars. So this kind of thing can happen in your gardens, you know, as things become more diverse. It invites some beneficials. This was one of the most exciting ones that happened. Okay, I have one crepe myrtle in my yard, and it got crepe myrtle bark scale. And I was pretty, you know, sad, and then so I talked to Lee Rumble, who's, you know, one of our extension agents, and he's a certified arborist also. And he said, okay, you treat it in the spring. So in the spring, I went out, you know, just to look at it before I purchased the stuff to treat it. And I saw these little guys. You know what this guy is right here? That's actually a ladybug larva that specializes in eating scale. And as of now, my crepe myrtle doesn't have any scale.
So you didn't treat it at all?
I did not treat it at all. My plant didn't have a bad case of it, but I was super excited when I saw the ladybug larva. This is what the adult looks like. Whoops. Okay, so this is what the adult looks like. It's a black ladybug with 2 red spots. So I did actually catch a picture of the adult. It's a little hard to see. But, so that is one of the things that happens as you get a more diverse landscape. It doesn't work for every pest or disease that comes in. But you do have that backup of, you know, if you need to take out a plant, it's not a big deal. And so, what is it? This has gone way quicker than I thought it would, so we got plenty of time for questions. So, does anyone have questions?
So
Yes.
Did you tell Lee Rumble about this unexpected?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I sent him pictures and he said, cool. Because it's not gonna happen in everyone's yard.
Because of your diversity though, in your
That probably
yard,
helped.
you brought
Mhm.
in.
I might have already had them.
I mean, not intentionally.
Yeah. I might have already had them,
Someone who
which
has
is,
a typical landscape and one crepe myrtle.
Right. Yeah, one of our folks is saying, you know, the typical landscape might not have
Yeah.
the ladybugs. And I didn't assume that I would have them. You know, I was just really excited to see them. So the question is, she was seeing some bug damage on her hydrangeas and sprayed it with soapy water.
Yeah.
And it just kept getting worse and worse. Were you ever able to identify what the pest was?
It looked like it might have been aphids.
So it looked like the problem might have been aphids. Okay, so typically when I'm pretty sure it's aphids, I actually just leave it alone. Because what can happen is, aphids are like the chickens of the insect pest world. All the beneficials love to eat aphids. But it does take them a little time to find it. And so if you have beneficials on there and you spray it with even the soapy water, you're gonna kill most of the pests, but you're probably gonna kill all the beneficials, because like for every 100 aphids, you might have 1 or 2 beneficials that have found that plant. And so when you spray it, unless you kill all of the 100 aphids, you're gonna have a pest resurgence. Aphids are one of those. They're actually born pregnant, essentially. There are images that show like newly hatched, they're sort of live birth, newly birthed aphids having baby aphids inside of them. Yeah, so they don't need to mate, so only one of them has to survive. Yeah, that's sort of scary. So what you can have is you can have a pest resurgence in that case. What we do recommend is, you know, if you are having a major issue, just do sharp streams of water on the impacted leaves, and that'll, it might move your beneficial insects out of the way, but they'll be able to come back. But the aphids, generally once you knock them off the plant, they're gonna die. And so you're just giving the beneficials a head start. If you do the soap in there, you're gonna kill the beneficials also. And so you end up in a pest resurgence cycle where you have your, you know, pest, and then you have your beneficials. And so it takes the pest down, but it takes the beneficials like here, and then the pests go. And your beneficials take a lot longer to recover.
Well, I did see, I mean, it seemed like the leaves got worse instead of
Yeah.
better when I did that. But now a lot of the leaves are like skeleton leaves, and it still bloomed. However, I'm wondering, should I, you know, try to fertilize the plant, because I'm worried now it's not going to get enough nutrients, you know.
Okay, so she's saying the leaves are looking skeletonized. I'm
Yeah.
trying to repeat what you're
Right,
saying.
yeah.
Are looking skeletonized now, and the plant's looking worse. Have you been watering?
I have been watering. I water
Okay.
every day. I mean, you know, the ground, not the.
I would go to every other day.
Every other day.
And
Okay.
really make sure and
Soak it good.
soak it good. You probably want to give at least a gallon, or depending on the size of the plant, a gallon or more. I would hesitate to fertilize this time of year, because the stressed plants, you don't want to push them too hard. Now you probably could do a gentle fertilizer, like a fish emulsion, diluted. So a fertilizer diluted half or a quarter strength, you know, with a liquid fertilizer. That might work, but I might not even do that with it. When it's in the 90s, I wouldn't do that. Okay, the question is, how often are the insects an indication of the health of your garden? They can be. If you have a nutrient deficiency, the insects will be more likely to find your plants, because they just aren't healthy. So a soil test is a really good thing to do. Quite a few of the soils in East Tennessee, or at least some of them, I feel like it's a lot of them, because my house is one of them, are deficient in phosphorus, which is an essential plant nutrient. I would not have known it if I had gardened in another area, in the Knoxville area. I had gardened in another garden, and I saw how my plants grew. And then I moved to this place, and my plants just seemed really weak and vulnerable. Phosphorus has to do with plant hardiness. And so when I moved to the new place, I realized these aren't growing well. You know, something's up. And I had just become a master gardener, and everyone was saying you should do soil testing. And so I broke down and did soil testing and found out my phosphorus level was in the basement. And so as I've amended my soil, I've seen my plants do better. So there is a relationship. For many things, it's just a correlation, not necessarily a causation, but there is a relationship there. Okay, any other questions or anything you would like me to talk about, just briefly?
I'll ask another one.
Yeah.
At what point would you yank a plant?
At what
Versus-
point?
Versus
Okay.
trying to nurse it back to health?
At what point would I yank a plant versus trying to nurse it back to health? There's a couple factors that play into it. If it was my grandmother's rose bush, I would try everything to nurse it back to health. And I would try to take some cuttings and root them and get them into other locations even. Give them to other people and see if they can get them to root. Okay, so if it's a sentimental plant like that, I would go to much greater effort than I would just an ornamental plant in my garden. I would say if it's over like 50% of its value to me gone, I would remove it. The other thing is, like with rose rosette disease, that's a thing that can be transferred to other plants by the little mites that are almost invisible that carry it. So if I saw rose rosette disease on my plant, if it were just in one spot, I would cut it out as far down in the plant as I could, and I would watch that plant, and if it reappeared, I would get rid of that plant. So it does depend on, isn't the answer always it depends? Yeah. So the answer is it depends. So it depends on how valuable the plant is to you. It depends on how virulent, how contagious, or how easily transmitted the thing is. If I had one cabbage plant in my garden and it was this time of year and I was seeing cabbage worms on it, there's a couple things I would do. If it was close to being harvestable, I would just harvest it. If it was a new plant and I hadn't covered it yet, I would cover it, and then through that mesh, I would probably spray BTK, one application, to kill any pests that were on it. I might have to do 2 just in case there were eggs that hadn't hatched. So it really does depend on the situation. Like a few years ago, impatiens downy mildew came through this area. And for a couple of years, you really couldn't plant impatiens without them. They essentially looked like they melted. And with those, just about as, if you saw that disease popping up, you might as well just take them all out and plant something else. Yeah. Is there a special way to discard these diseased or pest-ridden plants? It does depend what the disease is. With rose rosette, I would put it in the trash because you wanted to take those mites with it. Right now we're having basil downy mildew as a problem. It's not as bad as the impatiens downy mildew. But when I see that, if it's just impacting a few leaves at the bottom of the plant, I take them off and I'll actually bury those in my compost. Some people don't. Some people do put them in the trash. But that is a disease when the weather gets warmer and drier, it's not as bad. And my plants generally outgrow it. But there are other pests and diseases. Aphids I generally don't worry about. The Japanese beetles vary from year to year radically. Some years are horrible with Japanese beetles. And it's neighborhood to neighborhood too. And some years they're not very bad. So it really does depend. Um, But getting rid of a plant, if it's not giving you what you want and it's not particularly sentimental for you, take it out and put something else in. The question was about some gardeners purchase predatory insects for their gardens. How do I feel about that? Very mixed feelings. The big one is the ladybugs. You know, and there's issues with how the ladybugs are captured. They're very often not from this area. There have been reports of them bringing in diseases that affect the ladybugs. And when you open up a container of an adult ladybugs, they want to go out and mate. And ladybugs have these things called wings. And they will very often fly away. And unless you have quite a large population of aphids, they're not going to lay their eggs. You know, they're not going to lay very many eggs in your property. I've heard people say, water your garden well, make sure you have a good number of aphids, and release them at night, so they're more likely to stay. A better one to get would be lacewing larvae and put them on the plants that are impacted, because you can actually buy those as larvae. I have actually purchased nematodes, beneficial nematodes, to help with allium maggots. And it does seem like they knock down the population of those. But you do have to really follow the directions on those.
What about praying mantis?
Praying mantis are a real iffy one. Most of the praying mantis that are sold are actually Chinese mantis egg cases. And so they are naturalized to our area. So they do live here. But our native mantis is actually the Carolina mantis. And they do cohabit in my yard. They seem to cohabit, you know, pretty agreeably. I think they go after different kinds of food sources. And they definitely do their egg cases in different places. The Carolina mantis will lay their eggs on a flat surface or on the trunk of a tree or something like that. The Chinese mantis lay their egg cases around a stem, hooked onto a stem. So they're very different. But they are a generalist predator, and so they will eat anything they can catch. So there are even reports of them catching small hummingbirds, even though I've never seen a mantis that big here. That would be the Chinese mantis. It does get bigger than the Carolina mantis. But they will eat anything they catch, so they'll eat your beneficials and your pest insects. So they're one of the iffies. The ladybugs, the lacewings, also syrphid flies. You probably can't buy those, but they're also called hoverflies. And there was a picture of one of their larvae. That one down here at the bottom, that's a syrphid fly larva. And so they're another aphid eater. And they're very common. If you look around your garden, you probably already have them. And they come in different sizes. There are tinier ones and larger ones. A lot of people call them bees because they're generally black and yellow striped. But they're not bees, they don't sting. And they will sort of inspect plants that have aphids, and the number of eggs they lay on a plant is directly related to the number of aphids. Isn't that cool? And their eggs are little teeny tiny white capsule shaped eggs. So an elongated capsule shape is what their eggs look like. So if you have aphids on a plant, look at it, see if you see any of those little capsules. And they're tinier than the aphids, so it's sometimes hard. I have to take my glasses off to see them. Yeah. Okay, she wants me to talk about the insect on the upper right. That is a goldenrod soldier beetle. And they also eat aphids. Everything eats aphids. And it will probably eat any other insect eggs it comes across. And so they're real common. Now, an interesting thing, a friend of mine sent me a picture of, I think it was one of her like hydrangea plants, and it was covered with these, but they had their wings out and they were like this, and they weren't moving. And so they had probably been attacked by a fungal disease that gets into the brain of insects and makes them climb up and spread their wings. I did look it up, and it is really a real thing. Some people have made zombie stories that are related to that idea. But a lot of science fiction horror comes out of the insect world. Yeah. And speak to pheromone traps and sticky traps. Okay, so pheromone traps can be a mixed thing. Like with the Japanese beetles, you get the pheromone traps with the bags, and they actually attract Japanese beetles from a large area. So put them in your neighbor's house, in your neighbor's yard, or if you're a place where you have acres, put half an acre away from your desirable plants, and it'll actually pull the Japanese beetles. But on the normal, half acre under lot, you don't want to put them in your yard. So the pheromone traps, can be a problem that way. The sticky traps are mostly as an indicator. They're generally not something that you use for getting rid of a pest. So I've heard recently about people putting sticky traps next to their squash that are bright yellow as an indicator of, do I have the squash vine borers? The odds are, if you're getting squash vine borer moths, which are clearwing moths that are red and black, they're actually quite pretty, you have a problem already. It'll tell you have the problem, but it doesn't necessarily trap all of the female moths that are trying to lay eggs on your squash. But, it can be an indicator of other issues. My brain isn't going to what particular ones it works well for. I know you can use them like for fungus gnats. Actually, indoors for fungus gnats, they actually work for helping get rid of them, because you can get enough of the adults.
Amy, invariably, once we leave, I'll think of something, or I'll
Yes.
find a bug that I can't identify. How do I get in touch with you, or how can I get help after this class is over with? Can I
Okay, how can we get help after this class? Okay, on the handout is Knox County Master Gardeners. Ask a Master Gardener. So you can email us. I put the email, I put the phone number. So you can email us with pictures or phone and leave a message. And on the message that you hear on the phone gives you a different phone number that you can actually text into if you want to text photos. The other place you can get a lot of help and information, and I know not everyone does Facebook, but we do support the Knoxville Gardening Tips Facebook group, and it's listed on the handout here. And I should put, I can add this to the QR. There's a QR code on the resources list, and so I can add this to the resources list so that everyone can see that. But if you go there, you can actually ask a question in the group. It is a large, very active group with many, many experienced gardeners, or you can tag me personally or Brian Townsend. On Facebook, I am Amy Haun, which is my maiden name, and it's the only place I use it. But you can tag us, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Yes?
Do you have a preferred app for insect ID?
I actually don't, and periodically I go through and do a search for different places that have tested insect ID or plant pest ID apps, and right now I think the best of them are working at 40 to 70%. So that's not good enough for me to really recommend a best. I personally tend to use Google Lens because I use Google Photos for my photos. It's the easiest way for me to access my photos on all my different devices. And it gets it sometimes. And sometimes if you look down at suggestions, you can find the right thing. But I really don't have any single recommendation. One of the things on your resource list is actually, what is it called? Comparing insect apps for budding entomologists. So that's one of the things that I put in there. Check that out. They've got some ideas of apps that work good. The other things that you'll find is the Home Plant Pest UT Extension resources. There's the link to that on this resources list. If you look at that, it has, just scroll down a little bit and there's like a chart that has many, many references and resources that are great for home gardeners. What is it? Common home pests, garden pests, what you can do, the whole fruit tree management plans. So it's got all those resources listed there.
Which one was it, Amy?
This is the one that says Home Plant Pest Management. It's at soillabs.tennessee, which is the Soil Plant Pest Center's website. And if you go to look at their main homepage, you can also find the information about soil testing. Their main page is actually listed on this card under soillab.tennessee.edu. What other things? Oh yeah, this was a really interesting one, and you all might find it interesting. This publication is landscaping practices that are bad for wildlife. So that's a really, interesting one. And then just some other about different places that have resources for the different methods. Okay, anything else? Well, thank you all. I've enjoyed talking to you.